Israel's military is reported to be using lavender, an artificial intelligence system, to help choose its bombing targets in Gaza. This is machine decision-making over human decision-making and arguably sacrifices accuracy in favour of speed. The lavender system identifies targets which are only reviewed for 20 seconds before authorisation of a strike. What discussions has the Minister had with MOD colleagues about the use of AI in combat, the concerns over error rates and the humanitarian impact on the ground?
Minister.
Too many civilians have been killed, and we want to see Israel take greater care to limit its operations to military targets and avoid harming civilians and destroying homes. That's the message we give to the Israeli government when we engage with them.
John MacDonald.
The situation in Gaza is having its impact on the West Bank. Tragically, this week, a 14-year-old Israeli child was found dead, and that set off a process of settlers rampaging across the West Bank. We now know that 4 Palestinians have been killed and others brutally attacked. The evidence is that the IDF soldiers stood to one side and allowed that to happen. A meeting with Israeli colleagues this morning, we hear that the Israeli government now is arresting legal and peace observers in the West Bank. Could the government now make it very, very clear to the Israeli government that observers should be allowed to operate within the West Bank to ensure that peace is maintained, but also could we have a report now in detail on the sanctions that the government is applying to Israeli settlements and Israeli settlers?
Minister.
I don't know the detail of some of the earlier points that he'd made. I'll welcome receiving that. But in terms of the sanctions, we put them in place. My understanding and memory is that on 2 individuals, we keep this under review constantly, because those actions and what happens in the settlements are important, and the implications it has for the West Bank.
Hammer.
Thank you very much. The escalation of recent days has been deeply worrying. We have 2 nuclear-armed countries exchanging ballistics, and neither with any reputation for care about civilian lives, and both with agendas of their own. That escalation has occupied the headlines, but the people of Gaza continue to suffer unrelenting military attacks and starvation. The rules-based order and international law have suffered lasting damage, including by the targeting of aid workers and medics. The UK's influence with an out-of-control Netanyahu government has yielded very little. One of the few legal tools available is the suspension of arms export licences. When will the government use that?
Minister.
As I said in previous answer, our assessment on export licence remain unchanged. We've got one of the world's most robust export systems in the world, enshrined in law through the Export Control Act and implemented through our strategic export licensing criteria. I think it's really important that she recalls and notes not just the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but also what's happening through Iran's destabilising activities as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Humanitarian agencies have concluded that we have passed the point of being able to avert famine in Gaza. Whatever we do now, it will be too late for those people who will have starved to death by the time the aid arrives. That is a stain on the international community. Can the Minister update the House on what specific steps this government has taken to bring about the full implementation of Resolution 2728 passed by the UN Security Council over 3 weeks ago? Pleading, pressuring, pressing the Israeli government clearly is not a strategy that is working. So why doesn't the UK government recognise that consequences and concrete actions can start with the stopping of arms sales to Israel?
Minister.
We are urging, we're pleading, we're doing everything that we can. We're doing everything that we can to make our case. And we're also tripling the amount of aid that we have to 100 million. And, as I said as well, we're taking action to have this life-saving aid corridor by sea to Gaza. These are important actions that we're taking forward.
Colin Lockhart.
Thank you. Having seen the drone attacks in Israel at the weekend, it is disappointing to watch the government and US administration basically telling the Israelis to roll over and accept this aggression by Iran. It was, however, encouraging to see an alliance of air forces assist the Israelis to protect their people. I do wonder why there is little condemnation of this aggression against Israel and continued acknowledgement. Had October the 7th never happened, there would be none of this happening. Therefore, what is this government doing to ensure both Gazans and Israelis are free from Hamas and Iranian aggression respectively and can live normal lives? And as we say in the UK, Israel has the right to defend itself.
Minister.
I agree, the government agrees that Israel does have the right to defend itself, and as part of our approach to finding and putting in place, enabling to put in place a sustainable ceasefire, the role of Hamas has to be put clearly in place. It must not have the influence it has at the moment, and its ability to fire rockets into Israel will need to be completely diminished to enable that sustainable ceasefire to take action.
Stella Creasy.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will know his words are not cutting through. Hamas was wrong to reject the ceasefire, but what Israel does next is not inevitable. And yet the Minister for Defence on Monday evening said that they were waiting for aid to be delivered to Rafah and for civilians to leave, and then they would begin the military operation. He will know there is nowhere for these people to go, and there is no food elsewhere. It is an impossible choice for people. A few pita breads will not cut it for millions of people at risk of starvation and at risk of harm from a military operation in Rafah. So what will the UK do if Israel proceeds with its threat to enter Rafah?
Minister.
As the Honourable Member knows, I respect her enormously, and we've worked together on a number of issues. All I would just say on this, vitally important, is that we want to urge restraint about this proposed military operation by the Israelis. We are also calling for restraint in response to what's happened with Iran, although notably the RAF and others were there to provide support to defend Israel from that attack from Iran. So the Foreign Secretary is in Israel, he's in the region this week to tackle these very issues and address the points that I've made.
Marcia de Codella.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, in response to my question about restoring UNRWA funding, the Prime Minister said that, along with allies, he was reviewing the interim findings. In subsequent responses to other honourable members, he said he was waiting for a final report, now which was due at the end of April. We know that this report is due on the 20th. Can we have a government statement on Monday where the government sets out a clear pathway back to restoring funding? The UK is the only major donor, aside from the United States, that have not restored their funding. Time is running out and lives are being lost.
I recognise the importance of the point she's made, and all I would say, as I said previously, we're waiting for the report, and then we will update Parliament on our decision. We need to review this report in detail.
George Galloway.
17 repetitions of "we're waiting for the report" will become the new definition of complacency. The more I listen, Mr. Speaker, to both front benches describing the bloody, putrid sea of misery that is Gaza, the more I was amazed that both of them continue to support the supply of British arms and military components to the country that's doing all this. No one could understand that. And the more he said how hard they were trying, and personally I believe him, seems a sincere chap. But why isn't it working? If you're trying so hard while scrambling your jets to defend Israel, giving arms to Israel, why won't they listen to you?
All I say with respect is that the questions that have been asked to me, I think, are entirely appropriate and understandable given the circumstances. I've responded as best I can from the government's perspective. I think the honourable gentleman knows from his extensive experience that the situation on the ground is hugely, hugely complex. We're working night and day. Our officials in SCDO are working flat out. We're providing the support we can for Israel and to help tackle the destabilisation. So I understand the passion that he asked these questions for, but he should also understand these are incredibly complex situations. We're endeavouring to do everything we can with Israel to make our case, but they are also having to think about the implications of what's happening and act after a terrible, tragic attack by Hamas and responses by Iran as well.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned to hear from the Minister that the allegations that have been made by several organisations that the trucks are half full or less going in makes counting the amount of aid getting into Gaza by truck a difficult statistic to use. Can I ask the Minister what he's doing to ensure that tonnage of aid is getting to the right places? Because quite clearly Israel authorities seem to not be able to deliver on their duties under international law to get aid to the right places. And what more can the Minister do to put pressure on Israeli authorities to do what is legally binding and right to do?
Minister.
So it's an important point. We need to not just think about the trucks but the tonnage as well. I will speak to Minister Mitchell, the Development Minister on this particular issue as well, and make sure we have extra focus on it. We do need the trucks, we do need the tonnage as well. It's vitally important.
Newland.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to finally hear the Labour frontbench seemingly find its voice on this issue after months and tens of thousands of deaths of shameful prevarication, yet still willing to potentially sell Israeli arms. And on the UK Government's policy, own policy regarding sales, the criteria for halting arms sales does not require a legal confirmation that breaches of international humanitarian law has occurred, only that it might have occurred. Does the Minister not consider the ongoing investigation by the ICC of war crimes and crimes against humanity and the consideration by the ICJ of potential genocide as an indication that breaches of international law might have occurred? In any event, why would we be so keen to sell arms to someone we've been pressing so hard to cease operations?
We continue to have grave concerns about the humanitarian situation on the ground, but this is not sufficient to undermine our judgment that Israel is committed to comply with IHL in general. And we've already talked at length about the export licences and our controls around that. We do recognise that Israel has the right to defend itself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Belgian Foreign Minister stated Israel was engaging in tactics of starvation. Last month, the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Ireland stated the use of starvation as a weapon of war is a blatant violation of international humanitarian law. This month, Belgium's Minister of Development Cooperation stated Israel's use of hunger as a weapon of war was a flagrant violation of international law. The Israeli Defence Minister was on record as saying, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly." When will this government wake up to the reality that innocent Palestinians are dying and take actions to stop them from dying from hunger and starvation?
Minister.
We're working hard to get the aid in, as I've already highlighted. That's absolutely critical. And we're also calling out the Israeli government to make sure that, recognising that too many civilians have been killed, we want to see Israel take greater care to limit its operation to the military targets and avoid harming the civilians and destroying homes, as he's indicated.
Curran Buck.
I think the world is astounded by the fact that we are having to rely upon sea corridors and airdrops for the delivery of aid when we know that the only way that we will prevent starvation in the hell that is Gaza is through mass truck supply and an UNRWA-assisted delivery. Can the Minister explain to us the government's assessment of whether the current supply of aid through trucks, air and sea is sufficient to prevent imminent famine?
Minister.
We've seen limited improvements. I've highlighted that already, but we want to see Israel stand up to its commitment to increase the total number of aid trucks to at least 500 a day and increasing the capacity through the Jordan land corridor to 100 trucks a day. So there's clearly more work that's required, and it's important to highlight as well, it's not just us, this is an international priority where we're working with our other partners.
Tamsin Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given the horrific scale of killing and the starvation of Palestinians, especially children, we need an immediate ceasefire, release of hostages, and the Netanyahu government must allow unimpeded aid into Gaza rather than continually blocking it. However, there also needs to be a process of investigation, accountability and justice given the serious allegations of war crimes, whether that's through the ICC, the ICJ or the UN Commission of Inquiry. But the UK government presently doesn't find any of these routes acceptable. So for the record, Minister, could he please highlight which of these accountability mechanisms does the UK Conservative government find acceptable?
We respect the role and the independence of the ICJ, but our view is that Israel's actions in Gaza cannot be described as genocide or the points that he's been raising. And we're also remain clear that formal determination of genocide should be based upon the final judgment by a competent court.
Mr.
Speaker, could he just explain to me the rationale, this is something that's puzzled me for some time, behind advocating a humanitarian pause in the bombing, allowing medical aid, food, water, basic supplies into Gaza, and then presumably just permitting the killing to start up again? I mean, bombing civilians is a crime against humanity. Isn't it time for humanity to be reasserted here and for the immediate ceasefire that so many have called for to be started now?
Our position, the government's position, is that we need a pause, we need to get aid in, we need to get hostages out, and then work for the conditions for a lasting peace. And we have to recognise Hamas's role in getting to this point as well. And in those conditions, we need to remove Hamas's capacity to launch attacks against Israel and make sure that it's no longer in charge in Gaza.
That's sharp.
Can I just say thank you to my constituents who organised a gathering for the Palestinians in the north in my constituency this weekend for Eid gathering, which I attended, and there I met Palestinian Gaza health aid workers, and I heard lots of stories, and one of them similar to the one which is a lady who had given birth to triplets, Nuzza Awad. Her babies should have weighed approximately 6 to 8 pounds each, but actually they weighed just 2 pounds each, and they haven't even developed their thighs because of malnutrition. Now, we know that 27 children have died so far, according to confirmed reports of malnutrition. We send the RAF jets in to support Israel when they are attacked, yet Israel does not heed the British government's warnings to get humanitarian aid in. So rightfully, people are asking, why is our government so weak when it concerns saving the lives of children?
Minister.
Some of the points you've made are absolutely tragic. It's heartrending to hear. But I just want to reiterate that we do want to see change. We're pushing for change, and we're taking the action to make sure there's more aid available. We just need to get those conditions now to enable the aid to come forward and get through to the people that need it on the ground in Gaza.
Live effort.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't, I beg your pardon, I'm not standing. Will the ministers say why it is when the Israeli government is not listening to him about aid getting in, that the government are still considering selling arms to Israel? It cannot be the case that we are pleading with them so much that the government then accepts that situation and continues to sell those arms.
We're working hard with the Israeli government on humanitarian issues which I've highlighted. Our export controls are in place and our approach remains unchanged. We do have to recognise that Israel does have the right to defend itself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says the government recognises the importance of opening a northern crossing, but as my right honourable friend on the front bench said earlier, almost no aid is entering northern Gaza. The situation there is most desperate, in a desperate situation everywhere. Just what pressure, exactly what pressure is the government applying to ensure that routes to northern Gaza become operational as soon as possible and remain open?
Minister.
It's part of our ongoing diplomatic efforts with Israel and with our like-minded partners as well. who are committed to providing aid to get that in. And one of the key things that Israel's committed to is to that northern route. She makes that point very importantly, and that is one of those elements that we're continuing to urge Israel to stand up and commit to.
Ronnie Cowan.
F-35s are reducing Gaza to dust. During Pinochet's brutal rule in Chile, the workers of Rolls-Royce in East Kilbride refused to manufacture parts for the Chilean Air Force and were hailed as heroes. Why? Why will this UK government not follow that humanitarian example and stop exporting the parts for F-35s?
It's because we've got one of the most robust arms export regimes in the world. And as I've said, we need to recognise Israel's right to defend itself. He probably noticed what happened over the weekend with the attacks from Iran. These are not just important for what happens in Israel, vitally important that is, and for those involved in Gaza. This situation has ripple-out effects that destabilise in the region, have global implications as well.
Ian Byrne.
We were told a month ago that 1.1 million people face catastrophic levels of food insecurity in Gaza, and we're reduced to airdrops. The situation in northern Gaza is horrific, and it's a consequence of political choices. The World Food Programme has said the area is largely being cut off from aid and recorded the highest levels of catastrophic hunger in the world. 28 innocent children reported to have died of malnutrition and dehydration because of political choices. What meaningful, strong actions will the government take to ensure international law is upheld and to ensure that all Palestinians have a right to food?
Well, I think I've highlighted already the steps that we're taking. We also highlighted the commitments that Israel have made, and that's what we're asking Israel to do, is to step up to its commitments. It's made limited progress. We want to see much further progress to help those people on the ground.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to UNICEF, one child in Gaza is killed or injured on average every 10 minutes. Yesterday, Israeli occupying forces struck a playground in the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza, massacring at least 11 people and injuring many more. The Deputy Foreign Secretary has boasted about how proud his government is to be supplying Israel with arms, even while it commits such crimes against humanity, and has been found by the ICJ to be plausibly committing genocide against the Palestinian people. So can the Minister tell us categorically whether or not arms exported from Britain were used in the strike on the Maghazi refugee camp, and for that matter, whether the three British aid workers who were killed at the beginning of the month were killed by weapons manufactured in Britain?
As I already highlighted, we have strong export controls, and the point that he makes, an important point, is we've asked Israel for a assessment and an investigation to take place, and an independent investigation to take place as to what happened in that situation.
Deborah Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to call for the immediate release of all hostages, for an immediate ceasefire, unhindered humanitarian aid, adherence to international law and accountability for any breaches, and an immediate international efforts for a two-state solution. But on aid and on international law, between the 6th and 12th of April, 41% of UN-coordinated missions to northern Gaza, where famine is underway and children are dying by the minute. And the obligation the Israeli authorities have to facilitate humanitarian war is a matter of law. It's not just about access, they have to get to where it's needed. I appreciate the difficulties that the Minister has found himself in today, but I push again on why the government is so ineffective in getting support. We've had months upon months of saying that things are going to happen, and it never has. Why have they been so ineffective, and what are they going to do to make sure that Israel adheres to our requests?
Minister.
I've highlighted that there has been limited progress, so that we have made some progress in our arguments, along with international partners with Israel. And now we're pressing for those other areas to be dealt with, including northern access. It's a vital priority, and we're pushing hard. And as I said, the Foreign Secretary is once again in the region this week to address these issues.
Matt Wester.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, Samantha Power of US Aid told Congress that they were witnessing famine in northern Gaza. Let's be honest here. To the wider global population, it appears Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war, whether it be the supply into the country or intimidating and killing those workers who should be distributing it. So does he share the US assessment of the situation, and will he commit to supporting and restoring the funding of UNRWA?
Minister.
We remain concerned about the implications and the targeting of civilians. Too many have been killed, and we want Israel to make sure they take greater care to limit its operations to military targets. And as I've said repeatedly, we await this report from Kelowna about the UNRWA situation, and then we can examine our response.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some 500 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza in the past 6 months. That's more than the total number of healthcare workers killed in all conflicts around the world in the previous 2 years. Does the Minister agree with Professor Nick Maynard, the British surgeon recently returned from Gaza, that healthcare workers are being deliberately targeted? And if so, why is the UK still supplying arms to Israel?
Minister.
I've addressed the point about arms, but I think it's important the point he makes about protecting aid workers, and we believe they need to do much more to protect them, and that includes the guaranteed deconfliction of aid convoys and other humanitarian work to ensure that they can operate safely.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've heard the Minister repeatedly, in answer to questions, talk about pressure on Israel, encouraging Israel. I hope that Israel will respond. When will he actually stand at the dispatch box and accept that for all the government's urging and encouraging, the situation is actually getting worse? So what is he going to say in concrete terms that the government is going to do now to get aid through, to make sure Israel lives up to the promise it makes and doesn't deliver on? And just addition to that point, please don't give me an answer about the strength of our arms sales licence regime. How can it be morally right to provide arms to Israel being used in the killing of women and children and worsening the humanitarian crisis?
Minister.
As I've highlighted, we've trebled the amount of aid that we are putting into to support those people. We recognise as well that Israel is an occupying power, so we have to work with them to enable these things to happen. And the important thing is we are seeing limited progress, and as I've said, now we're pushing and pressing to see further progress in achieving the aims and the commitments that Israel has already set out.
Chiomura.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister, I hope, remembers Hind Rajab, the 6-year-old Palestinian girl who was trapped in a car with nothing but a mobile phone, her own cries for help, and a paramedic queue struggling to get to her. They and Hind were all killed that day. An IDF investigation concluded that its forces were not present near the vehicle within firing range. A subsequent Washington Post investigation disagrees. I raise that case, Madam Deputy Speaker, to remember Hind, but also because whenever the Israeli Defence Forces' actions result in increased civilian suffering or reduced humanitarian aid, as in the killing of aid workers, the government's response is to call on Israel to investigate itself. Is that really the only way to ensure accountability and reduce suffering?
On the specific point about aid workers, I did highlight that we also want to have an independent review as well. It's really important that they're protected. We need to understand the situation that happened on the ground. And she highlights, importantly, that we are also urging Israel to take greater care in limiting its operations and the impact it has on civilians.
Jonathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Following the Iranian attacks of the weekend, we are one step away from the precipice of a regional war. And the comments of the Foreign Secretary this afternoon following his meetings with the Israeli government that he believes Israel is minded to act should worry us all. The British government rightly emphasised the need for de-escalation, but does it recognise that de-escalation must begin in Gaza?
Minister.
We need to de-escalate the whole situation and do everything we can to use our influence in that task. We've highlighted already what we're asking Israel to do and urging them to do is a humanitarian perspective in terms of their stated aims to carry out further military action in Rafah. And then there's the wider area as well. So we're working along with our partners in the region, around the world, to find ways to de-escalate the situation more widely. It is multifaceted, really complicated, but we're finding ways to bring that influence to bear because we do not want this to escalate any further.
Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every member of this House knows that it was that great conservative statesman who said that all it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to stand by and do nothing. Today, the Minister has, and he's a good man, we know that. He must have been embarrassed. He stood there, he's wrung his hands, and he's told us that the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, has pleaded with the Israeli Prime Minister. When did the party of Edmund Burke become the party of complicity and appeasement?
Minister.
I'm not really sure that question deserves an answer, to be honest. Look, we've already highlighted cross-party these situations are complex. We're working incredibly hard with all our partners. I think that's recognised by the opposition front bench as well. Of course, it's challenging, but please don't lower the tone that way.
Alan Bryan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, so 1.1 million civilians in Gaza are currently at risk of starvation due to Israeli aid blockade. It's clearly a breach of humanitarian law and a breach of interim ICJ ruling. Now, the UK government actually tacitly recognises the breaches because they're trying to bypass the Israeli blockade using the Royal Navy. But the UK government's incoherent position is rather than call out Israel, the Minister says they're urging and pleading Israel to change tack, while still selling arms to Israel and withholding funding to UNRWA. Now, the interim Kelowna report confirms UNRWA's neutrality. All other major donors, apart from the US, have restored funding. So what is it that's making the UK government wait in the final Kelowna report before restoring funding? Are they sitting intelligence that's somehow not available to all these other partners?
Minister.
We've made it clear that we want to see the full report and then we'll make a decision.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Between the 6th and the 12th of April, 41% of UN-coordinated aid missions to northern Gaza were impeded or denied access. The Israeli authorities' obligation to facilitate humanitarian support is not just about getting trucks in, it's about getting aid to where it's actually needed. That is a matter of international humanitarian law. So does he really think that less than 60% getting in is an acceptable rate? And does it really show the government's diplomatic efforts to be successful?
Minister.
We're seeing some success enabling and encouraging Israel to allow more of these trucks in. And as I said, it's limited progress, but it is progress. But clearly there's a lot more that needs to be done. And we're working with our partners to make sure we can do that.
Carol Monaghan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, testimony from an Israeli intelligence officer reveals that IDF soldiers were authorised to kill 20 uninvolved civilians for a single Hamas operative. Israel is flagrantly in breach of the principle of proportionality, and frankly, UK diplomacy is not working. So what will it take for the government to finally admit that Israel is breaching international humanitarian law and cease arms sales?
Minister.
We talked about this a number of times in this urgent question and our responses. And I'm just about to answer that particular question. Thanks for the encouragement there. We have grave concerns about the humanitarian access, but this is not sufficient to undermine our judgment that Israel is committed to complying with IHL in general.
James Murray.
Last week, Samantha Power, the Administrator of USAID, told Congress that northern Gaza is now experiencing famine. Almost no aid is entering northern Gaza. So does the Minister agree this situation is intolerable and unacceptable? And what exactly is the government doing to make sure it changes urgently?
Minister.
Yeah, the situation is incredibly challenging, and one of the things, I've said it already in answer to one of the earlier questions, is that in the commitments that Israel have made, one of them is about access in the north, and that's what we continue to urge Israel to now live up to its commitments so that aid can come in from the north, as well as more aid, more generally, into help those on the ground in Gaza.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Jim Henderson from Cornwall served in the Royal Marines for 7 years before working in Gaza. He and the aid convoy that was travelling from the north that he was supporting, they were following the right procedures and they remained on the correct route. It is understandable that the death of Jim and his fellow Brits should have seized our attention here at home and led to an investigation by the IDF. But the Secretary-General said a fortnight ago the death of all 196 aid workers killed in Gaza in the last 6 months should be subject to independent investigations. Does he agree?
Minister.
I've already highlighted how important it is that we urge Israel to do much more to protect aid workers. We want to make sure that there are guaranteed deconfliction of aid convoys, and we need to do other humanitarian work to help. And I want to pay tribute to those individuals who've done heroic work, including those that he highlighted. I think the honourable member will recognise that that individual he referred to is a constituent of my honourable friend, the member for Truro and Falmouth, who've been working, as I understand it, closely with their families, and I'm grateful to her for that.
Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister on a number of occasions today has said how complex the humanitarian situation is on the ground. UNRWA is the aid agency with most of the logistical and organisational network to deliver that. On Monday, the Prime Minister was asked a number of times around the interim report that he says the government has received. Will the Minister commit to publishing that in full, and the discussions that he says he's having with allies on what should happen next? Will those be published so that we know what it is that's holding back the UK from being the last country not to fund UNRWA?
The thing that's holding us back from signing off our approach is seeing the report. That's what we need to wait for. It's coming very, very soon, and we will be responding to that in full.
Alison Thulis.
The Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, has talked about the devastating destruction of Gaza's hospitals, including the dead bodies still being removed to the ruins of Al-Shifa. Will the United Kingdom fund the World Health Organization and other charities on the ground in Gaza to rebuild the shattered hospitals that have been destroyed under Israeli bombardment, and will he deliver the ceasefire necessary to allow this construction to happen, because that cannot happen while there is no construction materials going into Gaza?
She makes a characteristically thoughtful point, an important one about reconstruction. I think our immediate approach now is about the pause, getting aid in. That's got to be the top priority right now. Then as we look forward, let's get those conditions in place to have a sustainable ceasefire. And as part of that, we can work through how that construction or reconstruction would take place.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you. As I said to the Prime Minister in his statement on Monday, the mother of James Kirby, one of the other aid workers who lost his life while trying to deliver aid through World Central Kitchen, is my constituent, and the family want answers, and I would really appreciate it if the Minister could tell the Foreign Secretary while he's in the region, you pass that message on from the family. They want answers. Yeah. But given what he said about guaranteed deconfliction, and what we've heard from my honourable friend here about the attacks on healthcare workers, as well as the attacks on people trying to deliver food aid, can he explain to me what these pleas for guaranteed deconfliction actually mean? Because I just don't see that it's working.
Minister.
Well, it's. I'd also just like to pay tribute, as she has, to James Kirby, and our thoughts are clearly and our prayers are with his family. The work that we're doing to raise this point with Israel is important, and we want to find ways to make sure that we deconflict these aid convoys. I think Israel has recognised that there are challenges there. They're going to be carrying out their own report, and there needs to be this further independent review that can help find ways to make sure that this deconfliction can be meaningful and strong.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all thank the Minister very much for his response to all the questions. It's quite clear the Minister is a Minister with compassion, and he wants to answer in the best way, and we thank him for that. I had occasion last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, to be in Israel. I had occasion to visit some of the kibbutz where innocent Jewish people were murdered. I had occasion to visit the Nova musical festival where over 1,000 young people were murdered as well. And I had occasion to meet some of the families. All of that as a result of Hamas terrorism upon the Israeli people. The reason why we have got a humanitarian crisis in Gaza is because of Hamas. So can the Minister confirm what discussions have taken place to open wider channels to allow medical aid in and to allow ill people to come out to have medical interventions free from harassment and intervention from Hamas?
I thank the Honourable Member for Strangford for his comments, and I regard him as a very good friend. He's right to highlight the role in Hamas and what they've done to get to this situation, and now we are working collectively to figure out how we can best address these situations. Medical supplies are key. We will be providing those. We're providing support in terms of shelter. We've been helping with airdrops. We know there's more that needs to be done. That's clear across the House. There's frustration in this task, and I'm grateful to all the colleagues here across the House for, on most of the occasions, measured comments, and I understand their concerns. I'm also pleased that people haven't resorted to cheap party politics here. These are incredibly difficult challenges, and I'm very grateful for the questions and the challenge that's being provided. It's constructive. We'll use that to help make the case to those on the ground that need to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I thank the Minister. That concludes proceedings on the urgent question. Points of order come after statements, after urgent questions and statements, unless it's directly related to the statement, the UK we've just had. It is a point of order, Cherry Lynn McCrory.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I apologise for not giving you forward notice of my point of order, but it is something that has just occurred. The member for Tiverton and Honiton just referred to the death of one of my constituents, which has just recently happened in relation to this urgent question, without notifying me. And the reason I raise this today, Madam Deputy Speaker, is this is an incredibly sensitive time, and I have connected with the family through the Foreign Office and Development Consular Service, which is the right and proper thing to do, and I am nervous that his name is being taken to score points across the chamber when it is completely inappropriate to do so. And I wonder if you could advise me how we can avoid this in the future.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order. I noted the exchanges to which she refers, and it did occur to me as the exchanges were taking place that the Honourable Member for Tiverton and Honiton should have thought twice before mentioning the name in very, very, very sensitive, sad, indeed tragic circumstances of the constituent of another Member of Parliament. I wonder if he would like to apologise.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. My point of order is that I'd firstly like to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for her work on behalf of her constituents. I think that it is the duty of everybody in this chamber to work with sensitive casework as close as we can, and clearly she has done that. I should add that I used my point about an individual who has unfortunately suffered a terrible, awful circumstance, and I think draws a parallel to the 196 aid workers who've been killed in this awful, terrible war.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for responding. And we must be very careful because this is as sensitive as a subject possibly can be. And there are bereaved people who will be watching our proceedings. My heart goes out to them, and I'm sure the whole House feels like that. But I understand the Honourable Lady's point, and I think the Honourable Gentleman has said that he will be more careful in future. Thank you. We now proceed to the next urgent question. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office if he will make a statement on the deportation of Afghan refugees from Pakistan to Afghanistan.
Minister Trevelyan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK has a long-standing and close relationship with Pakistan. We engage regularly with the government of Pakistan to advance key priorities and interests, including on human rights and adherence to international law. We are closely monitoring Pakistan's policy on the deportation of Afghanistan's citizens from Pakistan, and we are working with the UNHCR and with IOM to ensure that Pakistan adheres to its international human rights obligations with respect to those affected. We understand that the recently elected government of Pakistan intends to resume their programme of deportations from mid-April following a winter pause, although this has not yet been formally announced. And whilst we respect Pakistan's sovereign right to control its borders, the UK, alongside the international and donor community, are urging Pakistan to do so in accordance with their international obligations. The UK has committed £18.5 million to the International Organisation for Migration, IOM, in Afghanistan to support vulnerable, undocumented returnees from Pakistan and Iran. As part of this work, we have been engaging closely with the government of Pakistan on these measures, and they have assured us of their support in relation to preventing the deportation of Afghans eligible for resettlement in the UK under Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy, ARAP, or Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, the ACRS scheme. Since the formation of the new Pakistani cabinet, the Foreign Secretary and the British High Commissioner have received assurances from Foreign Minister Dar during discussions on the 25th and the 28th of March, respectively, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs would support our relocations work. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we continue to work closely with the UNHCR and IOM to ensure that all Afghans who have been found eligible, including eligible family members, for resettlement in the UK under the ARAP and ACRS schemes have been provided with the necessary documentation to verify this and to prevent their deportation.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Saying that Afghanistan is not a safe place